Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The wind howled across the frozen wasteland north of the wall, a sound that seemed older than the world itself. It carried with it the scent of snow and death, whispering over fields of ice and the blackened bones of ancient trees. The sun had not risen for many days, and the sky hung low and pale, like a lid of frozen glass pressing down upon the land. In that endless twilight, the world belonged to the dead. Long before the songs of men were sung, before Aegon's conquest, before the first men carved their runes into weirwood bark, the children of the forest waged a desperate war. They had birthed a creature to save themselves, binding the essence of the cold into the body of a captured man. But what they made that night in the heart of the weirwood grove was no savior. It was the first White Walker, the being who would come to be known in whispers and fearsome tales as the Night King. For centuries uncounted, he watched the world from beyond the wall, his blue eyes reflecting the shimmer of endless snowfields. He felt neither hunger nor pain, but something stirred within him, a memory of being more than this creature of frost and silence. He remembered the heat of blood and the warmth of sunlight, though he had not felt either for thousands of years. What he could not forget was the sting of dragonglass, the one force that could unmake him. He had seen it once, when a band of the first men fought his kind at the edge of the frost fangs. The blade of black glass had cut through his followers, as though the ice within them had turned to mist. From that day, he knew he was not unbreakable. Immortality was not invincibility. And so, across the centuries, a thought grew like a slow winter storm within his frozen mind. There must be something stronger, something that could shield him from the fire of dragons and the black glass forged in the earth's heart. One night, when the moon glowed like a shard of bone through the clouds, the Night King stood upon a ridge overlooking a field of his silent army. Thousands of wights lay motionless in the snow, awaiting his will. Among them were his lieutenants, the other lords, tall and terrible beings with pale hair like hoarfrost and blades of pure ice that glimmered faintly with an inner light. He spoke no words aloud. His voice was the chill wind itself, but they heard him, as they always did. "There is a place far south," he whispered into the frozen air, his thoughts spreading like frost through their minds. "A forge older than the kingdoms of men. There lies the secret of unyielding metal. You will find it. You will bring it to me." The three chosen walkers bowed silently. They were the oldest among his kind, creations of his own making, once mortal, now bound to his cold will. Without sound, they turned and vanished into the blizzard, their pale forms gliding across the snow like spirits. Days turned into weeks, and strange signs began to appear in the lands of men. Small villages along the Bay of Seals were found encased in ice, every man, woman, and child frozen where they stood. Tracks like deep claws gouged the frozen earth, leading south toward the mountains. It was there, in Castle Black, that the first reports reached the ears of Sir Jareth Rivers, a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. A bastard of House Blackwood, Jareth had eyes as dark as the ravens that carried their messages, and a restless heart that longed for meaning. He had taken the black to escape his father's scorn, yet he found no peace among the wall's shadowed stones. That winter, his patrols grew longer. stretching deeper into the haunted forest. He was not a man who feared legends, but the frozen villages troubled him. He had seen wildlings slain by cold before, but never like this. Never so perfect, as though death itself had carved them in ice. One night, while sitting by a weak fire in the woods, Jareth listened to the wind moan through the trees. The other rangers were asleep, huddled in their cloaks. Then came a faint sound, the crack of a branch. He rose, drawing his sword. The forest was still, too still. A moment later he saw it, a figure gliding through the fog between the trees, pale and silent, the air freezing in its wake. Jareth froze, breath held. The figure did not come closer, but its eyes, two burning sapphires, met his. For an instant, time stopped. The fire flickered and went out. Then, as silently as it had come, the figure turned and vanished into the night. Jareth did not sleep again. When dawn broke, if dawn it could be called, he led his men back to the wall. He told his commander what he had seen, but the man only frowned. White walkers are tales, Rivers, shadows told to frighten new recruits. But Jareth knew better. He had seen the truth in those blue eyes. The dead were moving again. Far to the north, in the heart of the frozen land, the Night King felt his servant's gaze upon the living man. He turned from the wind and stared into the storm. Soon, he murmured, the sound like cracking ice. Soon the forge will burn again. And in the darkness beneath the Frostfang Mountains, something ancient stirred, a whisper of fire sleeping beneath the ice, waiting for the touch of death to wake it. The Night King's army moved as one, the snow rising around them like waves upon a pale sea. And above them, unseen, the aurora danced, a ghostly light that heralded the coming storm. The storm raged across the haunted forest, swallowing the moonlight and bending the black trees until they groaned like dying men. Through that endless storm moved three figures, silent and swift as the wind itself, the Night King's lieutenants. They bore no torches, for they had no need of light. Their eyes gleamed with their own pale fire, casting reflections across the snow. Each of them carried a shard of ice forged from the Night King's own hand, blades that sang faintly when drawn, as if whispering the names of the dead. The tallest among them, once a warrior of the first men, still bore the mark of his old life, a twisted iron chain that hung from his wrist, now frozen fast to his flesh. Another had hair white as frost and eyes that burned colder than winter stars. The third was smaller, quicker, his movements sharp and precise, like the flicker of frost spreading over glass. They moved south without rest, the air freezing harder where they passed. Villages along the way fell silent, fires extinguished, doors blown open, snow filling the hearths of empty homes. The dead rose behind them, trailing in their wake, their eyes dim and lifeless. By the time they reached the foothills of the Frostfang Mountains, 100 corpses walked in silence behind them. The mountains themselves loomed vast and cruel, their peaks hidden by the swirling clouds. Here, long ago, dragons had flown, and the fire of Valyria had touched the very bones of the world. The Night King's servants could feel it even now, deep in the stone, a warmth that defied the cold. It was the place their master had spoken of, the resting forge of the smiths of old Valyria, who had fled west long before the doom. At the mountain's base lay the ruins of an ancient stronghold, half buried in snow. Great doors of blackened steel stood half open, their hinges fused with frost. The walkers entered without a word. Inside, shadows clung to the walls, and the air smelled faintly of burnt metal and long-dead fire. They descended into the depths of the mountain, where the remains of furnaces lay silent. The ice spread around them, creeping over stone and metal alike. until the forge itself seemed caught between two worlds, one of flame, one of endless frost. But deep below, beneath the ash and shattered anvils, something glowed faintly, a sliver of red light, beating like a heart. The walkers paused. The light pulsed again, steady, patient, alive. The smallest of them knelt, pressing a hand of blue-white ice against the stone. The frost hissed and steamed. Beneath it, the shape of a vast ribcage emerged, bones blackened by heat and hardened by age. A dragon skeleton, long dead, yet not wholly gone. Its heart, preserved in the stone by old Valyrian spells, still pulsed with a flicker of its ancient flame. The first walker reached for it, but the moment his frozen hand touched the red glow, a burst of fire roared upward, filling the chamber with light. The white army above screamed in silence, their bodies crumbling into ash. The walkers recoiled, their ice steaming and cracking. Yet they did not retreat. Slowly, the fire began to dim, as though testing their resolve. When at last it quieted, the first walker took from his belt a fragment of black ice, sharp as a dagger. He drove it into the dragon's heart, and the fire shuddered. The light flickered, then began to change, red to orange, orange to gold, gold to blue. Far away, beyond the wall, the Night King opened his eyes. He felt it, the binding of flame and frost, the beginning of what he had long desired. His power swelled, and the sky darkened with the weight of his will. But the forging was not yet done. The heart would need the blood of the living before it could be shaped into armor. For that, his servants would have to wait. While frost and fire clashed in the mountains, Sir Jareth Rivers and his band rode north again from Castle Black. The commander had given him leave to investigate the frozen villages, though not out of belief, only to silence Jareth's persistence. "Bring me proof," the old man had said, "not ghost tales." So Jareth went, leading 6 men, veterans all, scarred and tired, but loyal to him. Among them was Darren Pike, his oldest friend, and a man with a grim sense of humor that no winter could freeze. They rode beneath the shadow of the wall until its great height vanished behind them. Then began the long climb through the forests, the snow deepening with every mile. By the 4th night, the horses were exhausted, and the cold was a living thing, gnawing at their hands and faces. When they reached the first village, it was silent. No smoke from chimneys, no sound of beasts. Doors hung open, and snowdrifts filled the homes. In one cottage they found a mother and child standing by the hearth, their faces peaceful but pale as marble. A single tear of ice hung from the child's cheek. Jareth's men whispered prayers to the 7, though none dared speak of what they feared. He examined the bodies carefully. There were no wounds, no struggle, yet everything was wrong. The air too cold, the silence too deep. The fire in the hearth had been frozen mid-flame, every spark turned to crystal. "Gods," Darren muttered. "What can do this?" Jareth rose slowly, his eyes narrowing. Not gods, something else. That night, they camped outside the village, too uneasy to sleep beneath its roofs. Snow fell steadily, burying the tracks they had made. Near dawn, Jareth awoke to the sound of whispering wind, and then he saw them. Shapes moving in the snow beyond the camp, faint as mist, gliding low and silent. At first, he thought them wolves. Then one lifted its head, and the firelight caught its face. Skin stretched thin over frozen bone, eyes burning faintly blue. "Whites!" Jareth hissed. The camp exploded into motion, swords clashed, steel met ice. The dead came without sound, unflinching, their numbers growing as more rose from the snow. Jareth fought beside Daeron, blade flashing in the dim light. But for every wight they felled, two more appeared. The cold deepened, biting through mail and leather alike. Then the air changed. A new chill swept through the clearing, sharper, heavier. The snow began to fall faster, swirling like ash. Out of the storm came a tall figure, pale, armored in frost, with eyes that burned like blue fire. A white walker. The creature moved with deadly grace, its sword of ice leaving a trail of mist. It cut through one of Jareth's men as easily as through smoke. "Fall back!" Jareth shouted, parrying a blow that nearly split his helm. His sword shattered on impact. The walker turned its burning gaze upon him. Desperation gave him strength. Grabbing a dragon-glass dagger from his belt, one of the few in the Watch's armory, he lunged. The blade struck true, sinking into the creature's chest. For an instant, the world stood still. Then the walker screamed, a sound like shattering ice, and dissolved into mist. The remaining wights collapsed, lifeless once more. When silence returned, only 3 of Jareth's men still stood. The others lay dead, frozen where they fell. Daeron wiped blood and snow from his face, his breath ragged. "7 save us," he whispered. "You killed 1. Jareth stared at the dagger, now cracked and dull. "Not 1. There are more, and they're hunting for something." He looked toward the distant peaks, where lightning flickered faintly within the clouds above the frost fangs. The storm there never ceased, and in his heart, Jareth knew that whatever stirred in those mountains was not the work of nature. It was something far older, something that was gathering its strength for the world of men. He turned to his surviving men. "We ride at dawn," he said grimly. "If the dead are seeking fire in the mountains, we'll find out why." Above them, unseen, the aurora flared again, cold and beautiful. And in the heart of the frost fangs, beneath stone and ice, the dragon's heart began to beat faster. The dawn that followed was pale and hollow, as though the sun itself feared to cross the wall's shadow. Jareth Rivers stood at the edge of their ruined camp, gazing northward. His surviving brothers, Daeron Pike, Old Tormund, and the Squire Bannon, were silent behind him, their faces gray in the half-light. The dead they had slain still lay half-buried in the snow, eyes of dull ice staring at nothing. The wind had died with the battle, leaving the forest heavy and still. Even the crows had gone quiet. Jareth felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. "We can't stay here," he said at last. His voice was low, roughened by cold and weariness. "The storm's moving south. We follow the trail into the mountains." Daeron frowned, rubbing frost from his beard. "Aye, and what then? Chase ghosts into the frost fangs? We've lost too many already." "Not ghosts," Jareth replied. "There's something alive up there, or something that was." He looked toward the peaks, black against the gray sky. "We saw the walker. That wasn't chance. It was guarding something." Old Tormund spat into the snow. "There's naught alive in those mountains but crows and stones." "Then we'll ask the crows," Jareth said grimly, tightening his cloak. They left the dead behind, their bodies soon swallowed by drifting snow. For 3 days they rode northward, through forests that grew darker and colder with each passing mile. The trees themselves seemed to lean inward, heavy with frost. Strange symbols appeared carved into trunks, circles and spirals of ice, glistening like runes. None of them dared touch them. At night, they built fires and took turns keeping watch. The silence beyond the light felt wrong, as if unseen things were listening. Once, in the distance, they heard a cry, neither beast nor man. but thin and sharp, echoing down from the mountains. By the fourth night, the trees began to thin, and the slopes of the frost fangs rose before them, white and cruel. A frozen river cut through the valley, its surface glassy and black beneath the snow. They followed it until they came upon the ruins of an old fort, stone walls half buried in ice, the remnants of some ancient holdfast from before the Watch was founded. It offered little shelter, but it was shelter all the same. They made camp within its broken courtyard, huddling close to the fire. The wind moaned through the empty windows like the voice of a restless spirit. Bannon, the youngest of them, sat near Jareth, staring into the flames. "Sir," he said after a long silence, "you think the others will believe us? If we make it back, I mean." Jareth's eyes stayed on the fire. "They'll believe when the wall falls, not before." Darren gave a humorless laugh. "Then we'd best pray it holds a while longer." But Jareth wasn't listening. His gaze had gone to the north gate, where the wind was shifting the snow. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure standing there, pale and still. He rose, hand on his sword, but when he blinked, it was gone. The fire sputtered, and the shadows grew long. Somewhere far below, deep within the mountain, came a faint rumble. The earth itself seemed to shiver. "What was that?" Bannon whispered. Jareth turned his head, listening. The sound came again, a hollow, distant boom, like a heartbeat muffled beneath stone. "Not thunder," he said quietly. "Something waking." They did not sleep that night. Far above them, in the heart of the Frostfangs, the Night King's lieutenants worked in silence. The dragon's heart now pulsed with an eerie blue light, and frost covered the bones that once framed wings, vast enough to shadow valleys. The walkers had built their forge again, using remnants of blackened Valyrian steel twisted with their own ice. When they struck the anvils, sparks of blue and silver danced across the walls like spirits. The heart's fire was bound within a crystal vessel of frozen glass, but it fought them still. Sometimes it flared, sending waves of warmth through the chamber, cracking the ice around it. The walkers endured it without sound, reforging their tools each time the heat broke them. They were close now, close to finishing what their master desired. The Night King himself stood far away upon the tundra, feeling each stroke of the hammer echo through his frozen veins. The ice beneath his feet cracked and sang with every pulse of the dragon's heart. But fire and frost are not meant to serve one another. The magic of Valyria had been born from flame, from the deep burning of the world's core. The children of the forest had birthed him from cold and stone. When these powers met, the balance of things shuddered. The Night King felt it, the unease, the strain. Yet he pressed on. The thought of dragonglass cutting through his kind filled him with ancient rage. If this armor could make him untouchable, then not even dragons would stand against him when the long night fell again. He reached out across the cold void between them and whispered to his servants through the storm. "The forge will awaken. The heart must drink the blood of the living. Bring me flesh, and I will shape it." The three walkers turned as one. That same night, far below the mountain, Jareth and his men were roused from uneasy sleep by the sound of hoofbeats. For a moment, they thought it was the wind, but no. The sound grew louder, echoing through the pass. They scrambled to the broken wall and peered into the valley. Torchlight flickered there, faint but real. "Riders," Darren breathed. "Wildlings, maybe." "No wildling rides with fire this far north," Jareth said. As the lights drew nearer, they saw a small band of men, 5 perhaps, cloaked in furs, leading horses heavy with packs. At their head rode a tall man, with a golden clasp at his shoulder, gleaming even in the dim light. 7 hells, murmured Tormund. Those aren't wildlings. Southrons by the look of them. Jareth stepped forward, sword drawn but lowered. Hail, he called. Name yourselves. The riders halted. For a heartbeat, no one answered. Then the tall man urged his horse forward. We are traders out of White Harbor, he said cautiously, looking for shelter from the storm. Jareth studied him. The man's accent was southern indeed, but his eyes were sharp and watchful, and there was something too deliberate in his manner. Still, he nodded. You'll find none better than this ruin, he said, but you're far north of any trade road. What brings you to the Frostfangs? The man hesitated. Rumor, he said at last. They say there's treasure buried in the mountains, Valyrian relics from before the Doom. My master seeks such things. Your master has more greed than sense, Darren muttered. The stranger smiled faintly. He is not alone in that. They shared the fire that night, the strangers keeping to themselves, speaking little. But Jareth noticed how one of them, a younger man with a scar across his cheek, kept glancing toward the north gate, where the wind whispered through the stones. When most had fallen asleep, Jareth approached the leader again. You said you're traders, he murmured, yet you carry no wares. The man looked up from the fire. His eyes were cold. And you said you're hunters, yet you've the look of men being hunted. Jareth's hand went to his hilt, but before either could speak again, the mountain shook. The fire flared blue, and the snow outside began to fall in sudden torrents. Then, from the darkness beyond the gate, came a sound like cracking ice, and a distant, inhuman scream that froze the breath in their lungs. Every man there turned toward the noise. Gods, whispered Darren. They've found us. And from the valley below, pale figures began to emerge, their eyes burning cold in the storm. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, whirling about the ruined fort like ghosts in mourning. The wind screamed through broken stone, carrying with it the sound of the dead, soft at first, then rising into a terrible chorus that made the horses rear and the torches flicker low. Jareth Rivers felt the cold bite into his skin like knives. His sword was already in his hand, though the steel trembled faintly. The southerner, who had named himself only as Meryn, stood a few paces away, staring into the storm. His men had drawn curved blades, but they looked frightened, their breath coming in shallow gasps. From beyond the wall came the first shape, tall, pale, moving with an unnatural grace. Its armor glistened with frost, and its eyes burned with the blue fire that haunted Jareth's dreams. Another followed, and another, until the shadows of at least a dozen walkers stood against the storm. The whites came first, shambling through the snow like a tide of broken men. Their skin was white as milk, their mouths twisted in eternal screams. The living drew together in a ring, back to back, as the dead closed in. "Light the oil!" Jareth shouted. Darren struck flint to steel, and a line of fire sprang to life around them, a circle of weak protection. The whites shrieked as they hit the flames, their flesh hissing, but still they came. Meryn fought with surprising skill. His sword was of dark metal, heavy and sharp, cutting through frozen limbs with ease. "We can't hold this," he shouted. "There are too many." "Then die fighting," Darren barked back, cleaving through the skull of a white that leapt over the fire. The storm intensified. Snow whirled in blinding gusts, and through it came a single, deafening crack, a sound like the world splitting open. Jareth turned just in time to see the northern wall of the ruin shatter. Stone burst apart under a blow from a long spear of ice, hurled by one of the walkers. Cold rushed in like a living force. The fire shrank and died. One of the creatures stepped forward, its armor gleaming faintly blue. It looked upon Jareth and spoke in a voice like wind over frozen glass, words that meant nothing to human ears, yet chilled the soul to hear. Jareth raised his dragon-glass dagger, though the memory of how easily his sword had shattered last time filled him with dread. He had no other choice. The walker came at him. Their weapons met, ice against black glass, and the clash sent sparks of frost into the air. For a heartbeat, Jareth felt the force of another world pressing against his own, a strength older than men, colder than death. Then the ground itself shook. The mountain groaned, deep and thunderous. Snow fell from the peaks above, rolling down in great white waves. "An avalanche!" Darren cried. Jareth drove forward, shoving the walker back, then turned to his men. "Run! Into the tunnels!" They fled through a half-buried archway at the fort's edge. Behind them, the storm roared louder, and the earth trembled, as though the mountain sought to crush all within it. Merrin's men followed, one glancing back only long enough to see the walker raise its arm once more. A spear of pure ice flew through the air and impaled the fleeing man where he stood. His scream was cut short as frost consumed him whole. Then the avalanche struck. The world became a blur of snow and thunder. Jareth was thrown forward, tumbling through the tunnel entrance as tons of ice and rock sealed the world behind him. The noise was deafening. When it ended, all was darkness and the faint sound of dripping water. He coughed, choking on dust. "Is anyone alive?" A faint groan answered him. Darren crawled from the debris, bleeding but breathing. 2 of Merrin's men were also alive, though one had a broken arm. Merrin himself stood at the edge of a faint light ahead, brushing snow from his cloak. "Well," he said softly, "it seems the mountain itself wishes to bury your nightmares." Jareth glared at him. "This wasn't chance. They came for you as much as for us." Merrin hesitated, then nodded. "You're not wrong. My master sent us north to find what lies here, a forge of the first men, perhaps even of Valyrian craft. We thought it myth, but the dead guard something beneath these peaks, and if we find it first, maybe we can stop them from taking it." Darren gave a harsh laugh. "You think you can stop the dead? We'll be lucky to live till dawn." Merrin's gaze was steady. "Then at least we'll die with purpose." Jareth studied him for a long moment, then gestured forward. "Come. The tunnels lead deeper. If the dead wanted what's down here, I'll see it with my own eyes before I die." They pressed on through the darkness, torches flickering weakly. The tunnel twisted and sloped downward, carved long ago by hands unknown. Strange runes glimmered faintly along the walls, sigils of fire and sun, dim but not dead. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became, though no flame burned. After a time that could not be measured, they reached a vast cavern. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but the floor shone faintly. Rivers of molten metal running through channels carved in the stone, their glow deep orange and red. "The Valyrian forge," Merrin breathed. "By the gods, it's real." In the center stood a massive anvil of black steel, cracked but still whole, and above it hung a crystal cage, pulsing with faint blue light. The dragon's heart. Even from a distance, Jareth felt its power, a strange mix of heat and chill that made the skin prickle. "Don't touch it," he warned. But Merrin had already stepped closer, his eyes wide with awe. "This is what they sought," he murmured, "the secret of unbreakable ice." Darren caught his arm. "Step back, fool. You don't know what it'll do." Merrin hesitated, but then the ground trembled again. A gust of air swept through the cavern, and the blue light flared. From the shadows beyond the forge came a sound, a low, rumbling growl. The air shimmered. Out of the darkness stepped a creature, neither living nor dead, a dragon's corpse reanimated, its flesh preserved by frost, its eyes burning with cold fire. Its wings were tattered, but its breath came in clouds of freezing mist. Jareth could not move. The beast was bound to the heart that had once given it life. Its death had not freed it. It had become a guardian of ice. "Run!" Darren shouted. The beast opened its jaws and released a blast of pale frost. The heat of the forge hissed and died where it touched. The men scattered, dodging shards of ice that exploded against the stone. Merrin rolled behind the anvil, drawing his sword. "We have to destroy the heart," he shouted. "It's what binds it." Jareth leapt forward, seizing a fallen spear of black steel. He hurled it toward the glowing crystal. The spear struck, but instead of shattering, it froze in mid-air, trapped by unseen force. The heart pulsed faster. The dragon roared. All at once, the light grew blinding. The cavern trembled as if the mountain itself was crying out. Then, through the white glare, Jareth saw something, someone, standing beyond the heart's glow. A tall figure of frost and shadow, crowned with jagged ice, watching through the veil of light. The Night King. And though the storm outside raged, Jareth felt a deeper cold bloom within his chest. The true war had only just begun. The brilliance faded slowly, as if the light itself bled away into the dark. The forge grew still once more, though the air was thick with frost and smoke. Jareth staggered back, coughing, his eyes stinging from the glare. He could barely see through the haze, but he felt it. The weight of an ancient presence watching from the other side of the glow. The Night King was gone, but the mark of his power remained. The dragon's heart pulsed faintly again, a steady rhythm like the beat of war drums beneath the earth. Darren dragged himself to his feet beside him, his face pale beneath streaks of soot. "Tell me I didn't see what I just saw." Jareth said nothing. He wiped ice from his brow and stared up at the pulsing heart. He was here, not in flesh, but his will. He's calling this thing to life. Merrin crouched by the forge, his sword still drawn, eyes wild with a mix of awe and fear. That was no illusion. The Night King seeks to bind this fire to his will. If he succeeds, he'll have the means to forge armor even Valyria never dreamed of. Ice that cannot melt, metal that cannot break. The same armor that'll make him invincible, Darren muttered. A deep rumble shuddered through the cavern, followed by a crack that echoed through the walls. A great fissure split the floor near the forge, and blue mist seeped from it, curling through the air like the breath of the dead. Jareth turned sharply. "We can't stay. The mountain's waking again." But Merrin shook his head. "You don't understand. If we leave it now, it's his. The heart will be his forever." He stepped forward, eyes fixed on the glowing crystal cage. "We have to destroy it." Darren grabbed his arm. "You saw what happened when we struck it. You want to bring the whole bloody mountain down?" "Better that than see the world burn beneath eternal ice," Merrin hissed. He pulled free and approached the forge, his shadow stretching long across the floor. Before Jareth could stop him, he raised his sword high and drove it into the base of the crystal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a surge of white fire shot through the metal, flinging him backward. His sword shattered to pieces. The light from the heart swelled, faster and faster, until the entire chamber blazed like the surface of the sun. "Get down!" Jareth shouted. The crystal exploded. A storm of frost and flame swept across the cavern, throwing them all to the ground. The very air seemed to tear apart. When Jareth opened his eyes again, He was lying on his back beneath a ceiling of drifting embers and falling snow. The forge was gone, replaced by a crater of melted stone that still glowed faintly red. The dragon's heart lay at the center, cracked but not destroyed. Blue fire seeped from the fractures, running like veins into the surrounding rock. Meryn groaned nearby, clutching his shoulder. 7 hells. It still lives. Darren rose unsteadily, his cloak scorched. If that was your plan to kill it, I'd hate to see you fail worse. But Jareth was not listening. He could hear something faint beneath the crackle of cooling rock, a sound like footsteps, distant and deliberate. He turned toward the tunnel's shadowed entrance. From the dark emerged 3 figures, tall and pale, their armor rimed with frost. The Night King's lieutenants. Jareth's breath caught. The walkers glided into the cavern with silent purpose, their blue eyes fixed upon the ruined forge. The first among them, taller than the rest, raised his ice sword and pointed it toward the heart. The remaining 2 moved to either side, forming a triangle of cold light. The cracked crystal began to pulse again, brighter with each beat. Meryn stumbled to his feet, fury flashing in his eyes. "No! You won't have it!" He rushed forward, raising the broken hilt of his sword like a dagger. The lead walker turned its gaze upon him. In that instant, the air froze solid. Meryn stopped mid-stride, his breath crystallizing before him. Frost crept up his arms, across his face, and within seconds, he was a statue of ice, his final cry trapped within his frozen throat. Darren cursed, dragging Jareth behind a fallen slab of stone. "We can't fight them all!" Jareth's mind raced. Dragonglass could kill them, but his dagger was gone, buried somewhere beneath the rubble. The only thing left between them and death was the forge itself. "Maybe we don't have to," he said grimly. "Help me." They moved together toward the remains of the molten pit, where veins of fiery metal still ran like blood. The heat there was intense enough to sting even through their gloves. "What are you thinking?" Darren shouted over the roar. "If the heart feeds their power," Jareth said, "then fire will unmake it." He tore a strip of cloth from his cloak, soaked it in oil, and bound it to a fallen spear. Darren caught on quickly, lighting it with a spark from his flint. The flame leapt high, wavering in the strange, shifting air. Now! They hurled the spear into the heart's open crack. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the world turned to fire and frost once more. A roar erupted, shaking the mountain to its roots. The walkers turned as one, their faces twisting with fury. Blue fire met orange flame, and the cavern filled with a blinding light that neither belonged wholly to ice nor to heat. The walkers began to dissolve, their forms breaking apart like shattered mirrors. But as they vanished, the lead one reached out and seized the heart, dragging it to his chest. The light flowed into him, wrapping his body in a sheath of gleaming frost. Jareth watched in horror as the creature's form began to change, its armor hardening, its eyes burning brighter. It was as if the Night King's will had descended fully into this vessel. The cavern began to collapse. Great chunks of rock fell from the ceiling, smashing into the molten pools below. Darren grabbed Jareth's arm. "We've got to move!" They ran, leaping over fissures and crumbling stone. Behind them, the newly forged creature rose amid the chaos, its body sheathed in a translucent armor that shimmered like frozen starlight. It looked down at them and raised its sword, now burning with a cold blue flame. The ground cracked open, and a wave of frost surged forth, racing after them through the tunnel. Jareth and Darren threw themselves through a narrow cleft in the rock, just as the frost struck, sealing the passage behind them in a wall of solid ice. They tumbled into another chamber, gasping for breath, The sound of collapse faded behind them, replaced by a deep, endless silence. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Darren said hoarsely, "Tell me that was the end of it." Jareth looked back at the ice blocking their path. Through its milky surface, faint blue light still glowed, distant, pulsing, patient. "No," he whispered. "It's only begun. He's reforged himself." He rose slowly, brushing frost from his cloak. The tunnel ahead sloped upward, toward the world of men. Somewhere beyond that frozen barrier, the Night King's new champion was awakening, armored in the fire of dragons and the cold of death. Jareth turned away and began to climb, the echo of the forge still beating in his chest like a curse. Above them, far beyond the mountain's crown, the storm clouds parted for the briefest instant. A streak of northern light shimmered across the sky, blue and silver, cold and beautiful. And in that fleeting glow, a shadow moved beneath the ice, vast and silent, preparing to rise again. The climb through the narrow tunnel felt endless. The air was thick and bitter, tasting of stone and old fire. Jareth's breath came in shallow bursts, his hands scraped raw by the jagged walls. Behind him, Darren Pike climbed in silence, the faint rattle of his mail echoing through the dark. Every few steps, the ground trembled faintly beneath them, as though the mountain itself still breathed. At last, the passage widened, and a pale light appeared ahead, moonlight seeping through cracks in the rock. When they emerged, they found themselves upon a ledge high above a frozen valley. The storm had passed. The night was clear and terribly still. Stars shimmered over the white expanse below, bright and cold as shards of ice. Jareth sank to one knee, staring out across the landscape. It was beautiful, yes, but it felt wrong, too quiet. Somewhere beneath that endless snow, the forge still pulsed, alive with cold fire. He could feel it in his bones. Darren sat beside him, pulling his cloak tight. "Do we tell them?" he asked after a while. "The Watch, the Lords of the South, anyone who'll listen?" Jareth shook his head. "They won't believe. Not until the wall cracks and the dead walk its halls. We've seen what's coming. They'll see it soon enough." Darren gave a weary laugh. "That's no comfort." "No," Jareth said softly. "It isn't." They made camp upon the ledge, too exhausted to go farther. Their fire was small, and its warmth barely reached their hands, but neither man slept much. Strange lights flickered far below in the valley, shifting glows of blue and white that moved like will-o'-the-wisps through the snow. Jareth watched them until dawn, his mind heavy with unease. When the sun rose, pale and thin through the winter haze, they began their descent. The path was treacherous, winding along cliffs of brittle ice. Once, Darren nearly slipped to his death, saved only by Jareth's quick grip. By midday, they reached the valley floor. The snow there was unbroken, smooth as glass, save for one long trail of frozen footprints leading north. Deep, heavy, and unnaturally precise. "Not ours," Darren muttered, crouching to inspect them. "Too large, too cold." Jareth's face hardened. "He walks ahead of us." They followed the tracks across the valley, though every instinct screamed to turn back. The prince led them to the remains of a frozen lake, its surface fractured like shattered glass. Steam rose faintly from the cracks, though the air was colder than ever. In the center of the lake lay a shape half buried in snow, a man's form, or what had once been a man's. Cautiously, they approached. The figure wore armor of strange design, its surface glinting faintly blue beneath the ice. Every piece seemed forged from frost itself, the edges sharp as blades, the chest plate marked by veins of silver light. The Night King's new servant, Darren whispered. Jareth knelt beside the frozen figure, peering through the clear sheet of ice that entombed it. The face beneath was pale and regal, untouched by decay. Eyes closed, lips still, as though asleep. But around the corpse, the air was colder than death. "He's waiting," Jareth murmured, "waiting to wake." Before they could move, the ground beneath them cracked. The ice groaned, and a web of fractures spread outward from the body. "Back!" Jareth shouted, dragging Darren away. The lake split open with a roar. A surge of blue fire erupted from the fissure, flinging them both onto the snow. When the light faded, the figure was standing, alive, or something worse. The armor that had been still now shimmered like liquid crystal. The cracks sealed themselves, pulsing with dim light. The creature's eyes opened, pale blue, burning with the same unholy fire Jareth had seen in the walker's gaze. For a heartbeat, it said nothing. Then, in a voice deep and hollow, it spoke, not in words men could understand, but in a language that felt like the breaking of ice. The wind stirred. The snow rose. Jareth gritted his teeth and drew his sword. "You're not him," he said, though his voice wavered, "but you serve him." The thing tilted its head, almost curious. It looked down at its own hands, flexing them as if testing its new strength. When it stepped forward, the snow beneath its feet froze to glass. Darren hurled his last dragonglass dagger. The blade struck true, embedding in the creature's shoulder. But instead of shattering, the glass hissed and melted into steam. "It doesn't work," Darren breathed. The creature raised its arm. Frost gathered along its fingertips, forming a blade of pale fire. It swung once, and the air itself screamed. Jareth barely parried, his sword nearly torn from his hands. Sparks of blue and white flashed where steel met ice. The creature moved with impossible speed, its strikes graceful and cruel. Each blow drove him backward, his boots sliding across the snow. Darren charged from the side, swinging his axe, but the creature caught it easily and flung him aside. The impact sent him sprawling into the snow, unmoving. "Darren!" Jareth shouted. His moment of distraction cost him dearly. The creature's hand closed around his throat, lifting him from the ground. Its grip was like iron. The cold burned through his flesh, searing him from within. He met its gaze, and in those eyes he saw the reflection of himself. Small, mortal, already fading. But beneath the fear, a spark of defiance flared. With his last strength, he drove his dagger into the thing's chest, where the veins of light converged. The blade did not pierce, but it cracked the armor slightly, just enough. From within, a faint glow flickered, weak but distinct, the same color as the dragon's heart. "Still fire in you," Jareth hissed through clenched teeth. "Then burn." He struck the crack again, this time with all his strength. The dagger snapped, but the fissure widened, spilling a rush of blinding light. The creature howled, dropping him. It staggered backward, clutching its chest as blue flame poured from the wound. The snow beneath its feet turned to steam. The armor began to split apart, lines of molten frost racing across its form. For a moment, it seemed about to explode. Then, just as suddenly, the light withdrew, vanishing into the heart of the storm. The creature fell still once more, motionless, its chest glowing faintly beneath the ice. Jareth collapsed beside it, gasping for breath. His hands were blistered and blackened with frostbite, his vision swimming. He crawled to Darren, who lay face down in the snow. The older man groaned weakly as Jareth turned him over. "You're alive," Jareth said. "Barely," Darren croaked. "Did we kill it?" Jareth looked back at the still figure. The light in its chest had dimmed, but not gone. It pulsed faintly, steady as ever. "No," he said quietly. "Not yet." They rose together, leaning on one another for strength. The wind howled anew, carrying with it the distant sound of cracking ice, the echo of the Night King's power stretching across the far north. Jareth glanced once more at the armored corpse, then turned toward the horizon. The wall was many leagues away, but it was their only hope. "We'll bring word to Castle Black," he said, "before the Night King finishes what he's begun." Darren managed a grim smile. "Aye, and if they don't believe? Then the snow will teach them," Jareth murmured. They started south, their figures small against the endless white. Behind them, the figure beneath the ice shifted faintly, its pale eyes flickering open once more. The storm rose to swallow them, and in the heart of the frost, the Night King's creation stirred, its armor whole again, its gaze fixed upon the world of men. Far away, beneath a darkening sky, the ravens of Castle Black took flight, screaming into the wind as the cold crept ever southward. The journey south was a torment of wind and snow. The frost fangs stretched behind them like a graveyard of white stone, each peak a tomb of secrets better left buried. Jareth Rivers and Darren Pike moved slowly through the drifts, their horses long dead, their faces half hidden beneath frozen cloaks. Every step cracked the crusted snow, and every breath burned in their lungs. The wall lay far to the south, but it might as well have been across an ocean. The blizzards never ceased. The world had become a wasteland of swirling white and silence. Even when the wind paused, the air seemed to whisper, the faint sound of footsteps that were not their own, of voices that spoke without tongues. They walked by instinct, guided only by the faint pull of the stars through the clouds. At night, they huddled beneath rocky outcroppings, sharing what little fire they could coax from damp wood. Their food was gone by the fourth day, and their strength soon followed. Darren's face grew pale and hollow, the lines of age deepening with every mile. He said little, though at times Jareth heard him muttering in his sleep, names from a life left behind. His wife, his sons, his home in the Reach. Once, on the fifth day, they saw movement far off across the snow, a line of figures, small and distant, marching north. At first, Jareth thought them men, perhaps a band of wildlings returning to the free folks' frozen lands. But when the wind shifted, he knew better. The figures moved in perfect silence, their ranks unbroken, the air around them shimmering with cold. The Night King's army was growing again. "We're too late," Darren whispered. "Not yet," Jareth said, though he hardly believed it himself. "If we can reach Castle Black, they can warn the realms. The wall still stands." But the truth weighed heavy in his mind. The creature he had faced in the mountains, the first of the Night King's new soldiers, had not died. The armor that had withstood dragon glass and flame would soon be forged for others, and when those others marched, no blade in the world would stop them. That night, a full moon rose behind the clouds, casting a faint silver glow across the snows. They found shelter in a frozen cave carved into the side of a ridge. Its walls glittered faintly, lined with veins of blue ice. They built a small fire, though the flame burned weak and thin. Darren sat across from him, hands shaking as he held them toward the warmth. "You think the thing followed us?" Jareth stared into the fire. "No, it doesn't need to. He'll find us soon enough." Darren frowned. "He?" "The Night King." Outside, the wind rose. For a moment, it almost sounded like laughter, a hollow, cruel sound that carried through the ice. Neither man spoke again that night. When dawn came, their fire was out and the snow had drifted high against the cave mouth. Jareth woke first. Daeron was still beside him, unmoving. At first he thought his friend slept, but when he reached out, the truth froze his heart. Daeron's eyes were open, his skin pale as marble, frost clinging to his beard. His hand still rested near the dead embers of the fire. Jareth sat in silence for a long time, staring at the man who had saved his life a dozen times over. There was no breath left in him, no spark of warmth. The cold had claimed him in the night. He buried Daeron as best he could, piling stones over the body in the mouth of the cave. He had no words fit for the moment, no prayers strong enough to cross this frozen hell. When he rose at last, he whispered, "The wall still stands. I'll see it for both of us." Then he turned south again, alone. Days passed, though he lost count of them. The world blurred into white, endless and merciless. He ate snow to stay alive, drank from frozen streams when he could break the ice. His vision dimmed at times, his mind wandering through fragments of memory. His boyhood in the Riverlands, his first sight of Castle Black, the laughter of his brothers in arms before the winter swallowed their voices. And then, one night, as he stumbled across a barren plain of ice, he saw fire. At first he thought it a dream, a flicker of orange and gold far to the south. But the flame held, and with it came the faint echo of horns. Not the cries of the dead, but the sound of men. He fell to his knees, staring. The wall's shadow loomed faintly in the distance, a black ribbon cutting the sky. He had made it. With what strength remained, Jareth dragged himself forward. He passed the remains of an old watchtower, long buried in snow. Its stones were carved with sigils of the first men, spirals, circles, runes worn smooth by time, the same symbols he had seen in the frozen villages. A chill not born of the cold ran through him. He turned, half expecting to see the blue-eyed figure behind him again. But the plain was empty. Only the wind moved, whispering through the snow. When he reached the wall, the gate was closed. He struck it weakly with his fist until the strength left his arm. Then, at last, a voice called from above. "Who goes there?" He tried to answer, but his lips were numb, his words lost to the wind. The gate opened all the same. Strong arms caught him, pulling him inside. When Jareth woke again, he lay in the infirmary of Castle Black. The fire burned bright, the warmth almost painful against his skin. A maester leaned over him, murmuring soft words as he fed him broth. "You're lucky, sir," the old man said. "Another night out there, and you'd be lost." Jareth struggled to sit up. "How long?" "2 days since the patrol found you," the maester said. "You were half dead, raving of monsters and blue fire." Jareth's gaze found the hearth. The flames flickered, red and gold. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow within them, the faint outline of a crown of ice. He blinked, and it was gone. "Send word south," he rasped. "To Winterfell, to every lord still loyal. Tell them the Night King has found something new, armor that no fire can melt, no dragon glass can pierce." The maester frowned. "You're still weak, sir. Rest." "Send it," Jareth snapped. The old man hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish." When the door closed, Jareth leaned back against the pillow, trembling. The fire whispered softly beside him. Outside, the wind had died, but far to the north, beyond the wall, a new storm was rising, one colder than any before. Beneath the ice fields, the Night King stood upon a ridge of frozen stone, his new champion beside him, the armor gleaming like glass beneath the aurora. With each slow step they took, frost spread outward across the snow. The dead followed, their eyes alight with ghostly fire. And as the long night deepened once more, the Night King raised his hand toward the wall. A single crack echoed through the darkness, a sound small and distant, but heard by every raven that slept upon its towers. The wall shuddered, groaning under the weight of centuries. And in his chamber, Jareth Rivers opened his eyes, feeling the tremor beneath the stone floor. He knew then that his warning had come too late. The armor was complete. The long night had begun again. The tremor that shuddered through Castle Black was brief, but every man on the wall felt it. Cups spilled, candles wavered, and the crows on the parapets rose shrieking into the sky. The quake faded as quickly as it had come, leaving only a deep, unnatural silence behind. The brothers of the Night's Watch stood uneasy in the courtyard, staring northward at the endless expanse of snow and shadow. Jareth Rivers staggered from his bed as the last echo died. His breath smoked in the cold air of the infirmary. He could feel it beneath his feet still, the faint pulse of something vast and ancient, like the heartbeat of a buried god. He wrapped a fur cloak around his shoulders and limped toward the courtyard, ignoring the maester's protests. When he emerged into the pale light, he saw them gathered, men in black cloaks, faces drawn, eyes wide with the same dread that knotted his own heart. The Lord Commander stood by the gate, a hard-faced man named Roderick Pike. He turned as Jareth approached. "You should be abed, Rivers," Pike said. "You're not fit to walk, let alone stand." Jareth shook his head. "You felt it?" The commander's jaw tightened. "Aye." The wall shook like a beast stirring in its sleep. The ice cracked near Eastwatch, they say. The ravens won't settle. What in the seven hells do you think it was? Jareth's eyes drifted to the horizon. The beginning. The words hung heavy in the air. That night, no fires were lit along the northern parapet. The wind came from the far reaches of the Frostfangs, carrying with it a smell of old, frozen earth, a smell that did not belong to the living world. The aurora shimmered faintly above, green and blue and white, painting the ice towers in ghostly light. Jareth could not sleep. He stood watch upon the wall until the stars faded. Every now and again he fancied he saw movement far below, a flicker of pale light across the snowfields, here and gone. Perhaps moonlight on ice, he told himself. Perhaps not. At dawn, a horn sounded from the east. One long blast. A patrol had been found. By the time Jareth reached the gate, the bodies were being brought in on sledges. 6 men, all frozen stiff, their faces pale and eyes wide. Their armor was rimed with frost, their fingers blackened with cold. They had not been dead long, yet already the chill clung to them like a curse. "They were part of the Eastwatch garrison," said Roderick grimly. "Found just inside the woods. No signs of battle, no wounds." Jareth knelt beside one of the bodies. The man's eyes were open, clouded, but something about them made him recoil. They glimmered faintly blue, as if some dying ember still burned behind the frost. "Burn them," he said sharply. Roderick frowned. "They're our brothers. Burn them now," Jareth snapped, louder than he intended. "You know what happens if we don't." The Lord Commander studied him for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "Do it." By midday, smoke rose from the pyre outside the gate. The bodies burned slow, the flames struggling against the cold. The smell of it carried on the wind, bitter and sharp. The brothers watched in silence, their faces grim. When the fire finally died, Roderick turned to Jareth. "You said you saw him beyond the wall, the one they call the Night King. You spoke of a forge, armor that couldn't break." Jareth's mouth was dry. "Aye." Roderick's eyes narrowed. "Tell me what you saw again." So Jareth told him of the dragon's heart buried beneath the mountain, of the Walker's forge, of the creature reborn in frost and flame. He spoke of the Night King's lieutenants and the armor that had withstood every weapon men possessed. The words felt heavy on his tongue, as though speaking them gave them power. When he finished, the commander said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, "I believe you." Jareth looked up sharply. Roderick's gaze was fixed on the horizon. "I've fought too many winters to doubt what my own eyes show me. The wall's old magic is weakening. We can all feel it. If what you say is true, then the Night Kings found a way to finish what he began thousands of years ago. The world won't believe us," Jareth said bitterly. "They'll keep fighting their little wars, counting their crowns while the cold creeps closer." Roderick's mouth twisted in a grim smile. "Then we'll fight alone, as we always have." That night, they sent ravens to every stronghold still loyal to the Watch. Winterfell, White Harbor, even Old Town. Few would come, Jareth knew, but hope was a hard thing to kill. 3 days passed. The cold deepened. Men whispered of shapes seen moving beyond the trees, too tall for men, too swift for beasts. The fires along the wall burned brighter, and still the shadows gathered. Then, on the 4th night, the horn sounded again. 3 blasts this time. The dead. The cry spread through Castle Black like wildfire. Men rushed to arms, dragging spears and torches to the gate. Jareth was among them, his heart pounding. When the great wooden doors groaned open, he saw them, figures moving in the distance, glinting faintly in the moonlight. Not a horde, not yet. A small company advancing in silence across the snow. At their head rode one cloaked in frost, its armor gleaming like crystal. Jareth's breath caught. It was the creature from the mountains, the one he had thought dead. Its eyes blazed brighter than the rest, its armor now whole and perfect, every surface smooth as glass. The Night King's champion had come south. Roderick gave the order. The fires along the wall roared to life, flaming arrows filling the sky. They fell among the advancing dead, but the whites did not falter. The creature at their head raised its sword, and the flames dimmed, smothered by an unseen wind. Ice cracked beneath the wall's base. The air filled with a sound like 1,000 breaking mirrors. Jareth gripped his sword tighter. "Archers! Again!" But before they could loose, the creature lifted its hand. The ground split open, and a wave of frost raced forward. Men screamed as their legs froze solid, their bodies locked in place. Others fell back in terror. Roderick drew his sword, shouting, "For the Watch!" and charged forward with a handful of men. Jareth followed, though every instinct told him it was hopeless. The creature's blade met the commander's steel, shattering it in a single blow. Roderick fell without a sound. The thing turned its gaze upon Jareth, and in that frozen moment, he saw the reflection of the forge fire burning within its chest. He swung his sword wildly, but the blade splintered. The creature's hand closed around his throat, lifting him as easily as a child's toy. "You," Jareth gasped, "you were never meant to live." The thing tilted its head, studying him. Then, slowly, it lowered him to the ground. Its voice, when it came, was not the Night King's, nor any man's. It was the sound of the wind whispering through frozen stone. "He comes." Then it turned, striding back into the storm. The dead followed in silence, leaving only shattered ice and blood behind. Jareth crawled to his knees, gasping. The wall loomed above, cracking faintly in the moonlight. From somewhere high above came the low groan of shifting ice. He looked up just as a great fissure spread across the wall's face, stretching from base to summit. The sound that followed was like the cry of the world breaking. Jareth fell to his knees as the first tower collapsed, ice tumbling in waves. The wall, ancient, mighty, eternal, was dying. And as it fell, far to the north, the Night King lifted his hand. The wind rose in answer. The long night had returned, and its herald wore armor forged from the heart of a dragon. When the wall broke, it was not a single sound, but 1,000. The thunder of shattering ice, the roar of wind unleashed from centuries of imprisonment, the screams of men and beasts buried beneath the falling towers. The night lit up as if by lightning, flashes of blue fire arcing through the cracks, painting the world in ghostly light. Jareth Rivers clung to a splintered beam as the ground trembled beneath him. The gatehouse of Castle Black shuddered, the stones splitting apart like rotten wood. He heard the cries of his brothers echoing through the chaos. Orders shouted, prayers whispered, the death screams of men swallowed by the storm, and above it all, the deep, grinding groan of the wall's death. When the trembling ceased, silence followed, vast, endless, suffocating. The wall was broken. Jareth staggered to his feet, coughing up dust and ice. The air was thick with mist, and where the great barrier had once stood, there was only ruin. A chasm yawned before him, stretching north to south, filled with heaps of shattered ice that glowed faintly with inner frost. The wind that poured through it was colder than death itself. The dead were already crossing. He saw them moving through the mist, countless forms pale and silent, their eyes burning with the light of the grave. At their head rode 2 tall figures, the Night King and his champion. Both glowed faintly blue in the moonlight, their armor shimmering like starlit glass. The dragon fire forged within that armor burned cold, defying all warmth, all life. Jareth could not move. The sight held him frozen in place. Then he heard the horns, 3 blasts from the south, the signal for retreat. He turned and ran. Behind him, the screams began anew. The Night's Watch fought valiantly, but the tide of death could not be stopped. Fire burned for a time, but the flames died under the weight of the cold. Steel shattered, flesh froze, and cries turned to silence. Jareth fled through the wreckage of Castle Black, leaping over fallen beams and bodies half buried in snow. The tunnels beneath the fortress were already filling with frost, the air too cold to breathe. Somewhere in the chaos, he thought he saw the Lord Commander rise once more, his eyes now blue, his mouth open in a silent wail. By dawn, Castle Black was gone. Jareth and a handful of survivors, less than 20, made their way into the forest south of the wall. They carried little but what they could hold: torches, a few blades, a bundle of ravens yet to be loosed. They stopped only when the sun rose, weak and gray through the clouds. They built no fire. The cold had grown too fierce for flame to catch. One of the younger brothers, a boy named Klein, spoke in a trembling voice. "What do we do now?" Jareth looked north, where a plume of pale mist still rose from the ruins. "We run. We warn the south. The wall is fallen, and the dead march." The boy nodded, but his eyes were wide with hopelessness. They marched for 2 days through the forest. The trees were rimed with ice, their branches heavy with snow. Sometimes, when the wind blew, the creak of wood sounded almost like voices. On the 3rd night, they made camp in the ruins of an old wildling village. Half-buried huts formed a crude circle, their roofs long since collapsed. They found no life there, only the bones of those who had perished long ago. As the men huddled in silence, Jareth climbed a nearby ridge to watch the northern horizon. The stars were gone, swallowed by cloud. The wind moaned softly, bringing with it the faint echo of movement, a sound like marching feet, far away but drawing nearer. They had no chance, not if they stayed together. He returned to the camp and gathered the brothers around the dying fire. "We split," he said. "Small groups. The more of us that reach the south, the better." "No," said Klein. "We can't leave each other." "You can," Jareth said, his tone firm but not unkind. "And you will. If one of you reaches Winterfell, the realm might yet stand a chance." They argued, but in the end, they obeyed. The Watch had always obeyed. By dawn, they were gone, each small band vanishing into the endless snow, their black cloaks fluttering like crows' wings. Jareth walked alone. He followed the King's Road south for a time, though it was buried under a blanket of frost. His mind drifted between memories and exhaustion. He thought of Darren Pike, of Meryn, and the dragon's heart, of the forge deep beneath the frost fangs. He thought of the fire that had once kept men safe, and how it now burned within the heart of their doom. Once, he came across a frozen lake. In its center lay a single sword, half buried in ice, the steel blackened, the hilt carved with the sigil of House Blackwood. His house. He left it there. As the days passed, the world grew stranger. The snow turned gray, ash mixing with ice. Ravens flew overhead in flocks too large to count, their cries harsh and urgent. The air itself seemed to hum, as if some vast power had awakened beneath the earth. And then, one night, as he crossed the hills north of the Gift, he saw it. A dragon, or what had once been one. It soared above the clouds, its wings tattered and rimmed with frost. Blue fire glowed in its belly, lighting the night like distant lightning. When it roared, the ground trembled. Viserion, the dead dragon of the Night King. Jareth fell to his knees, watching as the beast vanished into the clouds. For the first time in his life, he felt true despair. He reached Winterfell 3 nights later. The castle's towers rose from the snow like the teeth of a sleeping wolf. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the banners of House Stark fluttered faintly in the wind. The great gate opened as he approached, guards rushing to meet him. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse and broken. "The wall is gone," he told them. "The Night King rides south." The words spread like fire through the castle. Within an hour, bells rang through the courtyards, summoning every man and woman to arms. They brought Jareth before Lady Arya Stark herself. She sat in the great hall, clad in dark leathers, her face hard as carved stone. When she looked at him, her gray eyes betrayed no fear, only readiness. "You saw it fall?" she asked. He nodded. "I was there." "And the Night King?" "Alive," he said softly, "and stronger than before. He wears armor forged from the heart of a dragon. Nothing touches him now. No fire, no steel, not even dragon glass." For the first time, she was silent. At last, she said, "Then we'll find another way." Jareth looked into her eyes and saw the same flame that had once burned in Jon Snow's, the same defiance, the same unyielding courage. Outside, horns sounded upon the ramparts. The dead had not yet reached Winterfell, but the cold was already upon them. Snow began to fall again, slow and silent. Jareth turned toward the window, watching as it blanketed the fields in white. Somewhere beyond the forests, the Night King marched with his new champion, and the sound of their coming was the heartbeat of winter itself. He closed his eyes. "The long night has begun," he whispered. Arya rose, her hand upon the hilt of her blade. "Then let us meet it awake." And far to the north, unseen beyond the blizzard's veil, a figure in shining frost paused upon a ridge and turned its gaze toward Winterfell. Its armor glowed faintly blue, the light of the dragon's heart pulsing within. The Night King's champion smiled without lips. Then he took his first step south. Winterfell's great hall was filled with the murmurs of war. The crackle of torches could not drown the voices. Lords and captains speaking in low tones, their words carried like shadows between the stones. The banners of the north hung heavy with frost. The air was cold, though the hearths burned bright, and every face bore the same grim knowing that before the next moon rose, Winterfell might stand against death itself. Jareth Rivers sat near the back of the chamber, his hands wrapped in bandages. The frostbite had taken 2 fingers, but pain meant little now. He listened as Lady Arya Stark stood before the assembled men and women of the north. "The wall is gone," she said, her voice steady. "The Night King marches south, and his army follows. There is no safety beyond these walls, no refuge to the south. We hold here, or there will be nothing left to hold anywhere." A murmur rippled through the room, some in fear, others in fierce agreement. Lord Wylis Manderley of White Harbor rose, his heavy frame shaking. "We fought the dead once before," he said, "at Winterfell, with Jon Snow and Daenerys Stormborn. We burned them, broke them. If we must, we'll do it again." "The last time," Arya replied quietly, "dragons fought beside us. This time, there are none." At that, the room fell silent. She turned to Jareth, her gray eyes steady. "Tell them what you saw." He rose slowly, leaning on the table for strength. Every gaze in the hall turned toward him. Lords of the North, soldiers, even maids pressed against the walls to listen. "I saw the wall fall," he began. "I saw the Night King rise from the ruins, and his champion with him, a creature armored in ice and fire both. The dead follow him, countless and tireless. No sword, no fire, no dragon glass can touch that armor. I struck it myself, and lived only because it let me go." "Let you go?" asked Lady Barbary Dustin, her sharp eyes narrowing. Jareth nodded. "It spoke. Just 2 words. He comes." The words filled the chamber like a breath of cold air. Even the fire seemed to falter for an instant. Arya's expression did not change. "Then he'll find us ready." When the council broke, orders spread through the castle. The blacksmiths of Winterfell worked day and night, reforging every weapon they could. The maesters prepared the ravens, though few birds remained. Many had vanished into the storm. The crypts were sealed, and the children sent below with the old and infirm. Jareth helped where he could. His body was failing, but his spirit was not. He walked the battlements, feeling the cold bite through his cloak, and thought of the brothers he had left buried in the snow. That night, as the moon rose, Arya came to him upon the walls. She wore dark leather and no cloak, her face calm despite the wind that cut like knives. "You've seen the Night King's strength," she said. "Tell me, can he be killed?" Jareth hesitated. "He can be broken, perhaps. But killed? I don't know. The children of the forest made him with fire and ice both. No blade forged by man could undo such magic." Arya's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the northern lights shimmered faintly. "Then we'll find another way. There's always a way." Her words carried the quiet certainty of someone who had seen death before and refused to bow to it. "Your brother Jon would say the same," Jareth said. Her eyes softened for the briefest moment. "He taught me well." They stood in silence for a while, watching the snow drift across the fields. The storm clouds were gathering again, vast, dark, and endless. By dawn, scouts returned from the northern hills. None of them spoke at first. Their faces told enough. The dead were near. A horn sounded 3 times, deep and mournful. Winterfell stirred as one great body. Fires were lit in every tower. Soldiers took their places along the walls. The smiths stoked their forges to a fever pitch, sparks flying like fireflies. Jareth took his place beside the gate, sword in hand. His armor was old, pieced together from what remained of the Night's Watch and the Northern Armory. Beside him stood Sir Wendell Manderly, breathing heavily through the slits of his helm. "You think they'll come before nightfall?" the knight asked. "They'll come when the cold does," Jareth said. It came before noon. The first wave of wind swept over the fields, scattering the snow into whirling ghosts. Then came the sound, distant, faint at first, then swelling into a roar like 1,000 drums. The earth trembled. Through the haze of frost they appeared, an army of shadows. The dead moved in endless ranks, their armor rimed with ice, their weapons gleaming pale. At their center, towering above all others, rode the Night King, his eyes 2 burning sapphires. Beside him walked his champion, the one Jareth had seen reborn in the Frostfangs, its armor shining with the heart's cold light. The ground froze solid beneath their feet. The banners of Winterfell stiffened in the cold. "Loose!" came the command. Arrows flew, torches blazed. The first line of the dead fell, only for more to take their place. The air filled with the hiss of arrows and the crackle of flame. The defenders shouted, prayed, cursed. Jareth fought until his arms went numb, the heat of battle doing nothing to fend off the chill. A wight leapt upon him. He split it in 2, but another rose in its place. Above the din, he saw Arya darting through the chaos, swift and silent, her blade flashing like moonlight. She moved as though the battle itself bent to her will, but even her grace could not change what was coming. The Night King raised his hand. The fires dimmed. A silence deeper than death fell upon the battlefield. Then, from among the fallen, came the sound of cracking ice. The dead that had been burned or shattered began to rise anew, blue light spilling from their eyes, their wounds sealing with frost. The living faltered. Jareth felt the heat drain from his body, the breath freeze in his lungs. He looked to Arya. She met his gaze across the field, eyes fierce, defiant, unyielding. Then the Night King's champion stepped forward. It moved through the ranks of the dead like a spirit, its armor aglow with cold fire. In its hand was a blade unlike any other, curved, gleaming, half ice and half steel. When it raised the sword, the very air shuddered. Jareth knew he was looking upon the weapon forged in the heart of the mountain. The Night King's gift, the child of frost and dragonfire. The champion struck once. The great outer gate of Winterfell exploded inward, ice splintering into 1,000 shards. Jareth was thrown to the ground. When he rose, the dead were pouring through the breach, and the sky above was a swirl of snow and blue flame. Arya disappeared into the chaos, her dark cloak vanishing amid the storm. Jareth shouted her name, but his voice was lost to the wind. He raised his sword once more and charged into the breach, into the endless dark. And as the first of the dead reached the courtyard, the bells of Winterfell tolled, deep and mournful, echoing across the frozen world. The long night had truly come. The storm swallowed all sound. The sky above Winterfell had turned the color of steel, heavy with snow and ash. Flames guttered and died as the cold thickened. Even the cries of the wounded were muffled beneath the roar of the wind. The courtyard had become a slaughterhouse. Men fought knee-deep in snow and blood. The living pressed back step by step as the dead poured through the shattered gate. Jareth Rivers stood among them, his blade cracked, his breath ragged. He had fought through the first wave and the second, and still they came. The air stank of death and smoke. A spear of ice hissed past his head and struck a man behind him, pinning him to the wall. The man's scream froze in his throat before fading into silence. "Fall back to the keep," someone shouted. "Fall back." The cry passed from mouth to mouth, though few were left to hear it. The northern line broke, retreating through the archway beneath the battlements. Jareth stumbled with them, half dragging a wounded squire whose leg was bound with a strip of torn cloak. The boy's face was blue with cold. In the yard beyond, Arya Stark fought with a small band of her guard. She moved like a ghost through the snow, each stroke of her blade clean and swift. The dead that faced her fell and did not rise again. Her weapon, the thin Valyrian steel dagger that had once slain the Night King himself, still held its strange power. Yet even she could not be everywhere. "Close the inner gate," she commanded. "Now." Jareth saw the massive oak doors begin to swing shut as the last of the defenders stumbled through. He turned in time to glimpse the thing that pursued them, a towering figure clad in ice and shadow, the Night King's champion. It did not run, it walked, each step slow and deliberate, its armor gleaming faintly in the dim light. The snow parted before it, freezing solid where it passed. Its sword burned blue, a line of living frost. Jareth pushed the boy through the archway and threw his shoulder against the gate. The wood shuddered but held, the iron bolts dropping into place with a thunderous clang. The champion reached the doors a heartbeat later. Its sword struck once, twice, each blow deepening the cracks in the timbers. "Back!" Arya shouted. "Leave it!" The defenders stumbled away just as the third strike came. The doors exploded inward, splinters flying like arrows. A wave of cold swept through the yard, snuffing out torches and freezing men where they stood. Jareth turned, eyes wide, as the figure stepped through the ruins of the gate. It raised its sword, and the flames in the nearby braziers dimmed to pale blue. For an instant, all was still. Then Arya leapt. She moved with impossible speed, vaulting from the battlements above, her dagger flashing in the light. The blade struck the champion's armor with a sound like shattering glass. For a moment, hope flared, but the steel did not pierce. The weapon splintered, scattering fragments of Valyrian metal across the snow. The champion's hand shot out, seizing her by the throat. "No!" Jareth bellowed. He charged, his cracked sword raised. The blade met the creature's arm and shattered in two. He struck again with the broken half, aiming for the same crack he had made long ago in the mountains. But the armor was whole now, seamless and unyielding. The champion hurled Arya aside and turned to face him. Its eyes burned like stars through the storm. "You cannot stop what is already eternal," it said, not with a voice, but with a sound that seemed to come from the air itself, a whisper of ice sliding over stone. Jareth stood his ground. "Then I'll die trying." He swung again, though his arm was heavy and his vision dim. The creature caught the blade and twisted. The steel shattered, and a shard flew into Jareth's shoulder. Pain blossomed white-hot, but he did not fall. Behind them, Arya rose slowly. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her hands bleeding from frostbite. She looked at the fragments of her dagger, then at the nearest brazier, where the last ember still glowed red. Fire. She snatched up a piece of broken metal, pressed it into the coals until it glowed. When she turned, her face was set in iron resolve. The champion raised its sword for the killing blow. "Now," Jareth shouted. Arya threw the red-hot shard. It struck the crack in the champion's armor, the smallest imperfection left from that battle long ago. The heated steel sank into the frost with a hiss. The effect was instant. The creature froze in place, its armor blazing with light. Blue and orange flames danced across its surface, each one devouring the other. The air shook with the sound of cracking ice. Jareth stumbled back, shielding his face as the glow intensified. "Get down!" the champion screamed, a sound of pure rage and pain, and its body burst apart in a storm of shards. The blast swept across the yard, throwing men to the ground. When the light faded, only a crater remained where the creature had stood, its armor reduced to glittering fragments that steamed in the snow. For a long moment, there was silence. Then a cry went up from the walls. "They're retreating." Jareth looked up. Beyond the shattered gate, the dead had stopped. The ranks wavered, uncertain. The Night King himself sat astride his pale horse at the edge of the field, his cold gaze fixed upon the ruins of his fallen champion. He raised one hand, and the army withdrew into the mist, silent as the tide. The defenders of Winterfell watched in disbelief. "They're falling back," Arya said quietly, her breath clouding the air. "Why?" Jareth followed her gaze. The Night King had not vanished entirely. His figure still loomed at the edge of sight, framed by the storm. His eyes met Jareth's, and for an instant, he thought he understood. The Night King was not defeated. He was waiting for the cold to finish what his army could not. The snow began to fall again, slow, heavy flakes that covered the dead and living alike. Jareth sank to his knees, too weak to stand. The shard of glass in his shoulder throbbed, pulsing faintly with blue light. Arya knelt beside him. "You saved us." He shook his head. "For now. But the storm isn't over." From the horizon came a distant rumble, thunder, or perhaps wings. The wind turned colder still. Arya looked north, her jaw tightening. "Then we'll face it again." The bells of Winterfell tolled once more, their sound mournful and hollow. The wounded were carried to the great hall where fires struggled to stay alight. The snow outside deepened, hiding the battlefield beneath a white shroud. And far beyond the sight of men, in the frozen wastes that once lay beyond the wall, the Night King dismounted from his steed. He stood beside the fragments of his fallen champion, his pale hand closing around a shard that still glowed faintly red. He lifted it to the sky, and the wind howled in answer. The shard began to beat like a heart. The ice around him cracked, spreading outward in a vast web. Winterfell had won a battle, but the war was only beginning, and in that endless winter, the Night King's vengeance had already begun to take shape. Snow fell for 7 days without cease. It buried the battlefield, the corpses, even the shattered gate of Winterfell, until all that remained was a vast, unbroken plain of white. The world lay silent, as if the storm itself held its breath. Within the castle walls, the living moved like ghosts. Fires still burned in the great hall, but their warmth was feeble. The wounded filled the floor, and the maesters moved among them with what little herbs remained. The smell of blood and smoke lingered in the air, too heavy to forget. Jareth Rivers sat by the fire, his arm bound tight where the shard of ice had been removed. The wound throbbed with a strange, steady pulse, as though something inside it still lived. He stared into the flames, seeing not fire, but the reflection of blue light. Across the hall, Arya Stark stood with her hands clasped behind her back. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. She spoke softly with Lord Manderley, who still limped from his wounds. Their words were carried away by the wind that slipped through the cracks in the stone. The silence between each gust was worse than the cold. At last, Arya crossed to where Jareth sat. "The scouts report the dead have fallen back beyond the forests," she said. "They've taken no more ground." "For now," Jareth murmured. "He's testing us. He knows we're too broken to chase him." Arya studied him. You sound certain. I've fought his kind too long to mistake patience for retreat. The Night King isn't finished. That was only his hand, his champion. She said nothing for a time. Then, quietly, you wounded it. You and I together. That means it can be hurt. Jareth shook his head. It can be wounded, yes, but not destroyed. That armor came from something stronger than any craft of men. Even broken, it will reform. The shard that pierced me still beats like a heart. Arya's gaze hardened. Then we find that heart and crush it before it beats again. He looked up at her, seeing in her eyes the same flame that had burned in her brother Jon's, the fire of defiance that refused to die, even when reason said it should. You're your brother's blood, he said softly. He'd have liked you. He taught me never to bow to death, she replied. Not while there's breath left in my body. The door opened, and a blast of wind swept through the hall. A rider entered, cloaked in white, his beard crusted with frost. He fell to one knee before Arya, his voice shaking. My lady, riders from the east, a host of them. Not dead, but living. Arya's eyes narrowed. Whose banners? The man hesitated. None, my lady, but their leader bears a sword of Valyrian steel. He says he fought beside Jon Snow in the last war. For the first time in many days, something like hope flickered across her face. Bring them in. Moments later, the gates creaked open. The newcomers rode through the snow in single file, 24 riders clad in black and gray. At their head rode a tall man with hair as pale as winter straw, his face lined but proud. Across his back, he carried a great sword sheathed in black leather. Sir Davos Seaworth sends his greetings, the man said as he dismounted. I am Sir Harren Longwater, once of Dragonstone. We heard the wall had fallen. We came to fight. Arya regarded him warily. You're late, Sir Harren. The dead already came. Then we'll help you send them back, he said simply. Jareth rose with difficulty. There's no sending them back now. The Night King's power grows with every death. We killed his champion once, but he'll rise again. We need more than swords. Sir Harren's eyes went to Jareth's bandaged arm. You've seen it then, the armor of frost? I've seen it, Jareth said, and felt it. It was forged with the heart of a dragon. The Night King took the fire meant to destroy him and bound it to his will. There's no flame strong enough to unmake it. Then we find one that is, Arya said. Old tales speak of dragon fire still sleeping beneath the mountains of the Vale, remnants of the doom that birthed Valyria's ruin. If that fire still lives, it might break the Night King's spell. Jareth frowned. You'd ride into the Vale in the heart of winter? I would ride through death itself if it means ending him. Her voice carried through the hall like a sword's edge. Men turned to listen. Even the wounded raised their heads. Sir Harren nodded slowly. Then we'll ride with you, my lady. The next morning, the gates of Winterfell opened once more. A column of riders emerged, cloaked in furs and armor dark as the night sky. At their head rode Arya Stark, her face half hidden beneath her hood. Jareth rode beside her, his wound bound but his eyes alert. Behind them came Sir Harren and his men, the last remnant of Dragonstone's knights. The wind was sharp, the snow relentless, but they pressed on. For days they rode south and east, through valleys buried in ice. The rivers had frozen solid, the trees stood like skeletons of glass. They passed villages long deserted, their walls cracked by frost. Once they saw movement among the ruins, a small figure, bent and pale, watching from the shadows. When they drew near, it vanished into the drifts. On the 7th night, They reached the edge of the vale. The mountains loomed like jagged teeth, their peaks hidden by clouds. A narrow path wound upward through the pass. Beyond it lay the ruins of the Eyrie, long abandoned since the last war. As they climbed, the air grew warmer. Faint wisps of smoke rose from fissures in the stone. The snow melted beneath their boots, revealing black rock beneath. The wind carried a strange scent, sulfur and ash. "The breath of the earth," Jareth murmured. "She still lives." At last they came to a vast chasm, glowing faintly red beneath the ice. The ground trembled beneath them, and a low rumble echoed through the mountains. "This is it," Arya said. "The fire sleeps here." Jareth dismounted and knelt at the edge, peering into the depths. Below, he saw rivers of molten rock flowing like veins through the earth. The heat stung his face, but he did not turn away. "If we could draw this fire to the surface," he said, "it might be enough to melt even the Night King's armor." Sir Harren frowned. "How? No forge could withstand such heat." "Not a forge," Arya said. "A lure." She turned to Jareth. "The shard that wounded you, it came from his armor. If we bring it here, the fire might call to it, draw him to us." Jareth stared at her in disbelief. "You mean to summon him?" "Yes," she said. "Better we choose the ground than let him find us unprepared." Silence followed. The wind moaned through the pass like a distant scream. At last, Jareth nodded. "Then we'll end it here." They set their camp by the chasm, preparing for the storm they knew would come. As night fell, Jareth took the shard from his pack, a sliver of blue ice that pulsed faintly in the dark, beating like a heart. He held it over the pit, where the heat made the air shimmer. The shard's light brightened, answering the call of the earth below. And far to the north, beyond the frozen forests, the Night King lifted his head. The wind rose at his back, and the snow began to fall once more. He turned his gaze southward, toward the vale, and began to walk. The wind in the vale screamed like a living thing. It poured down the mountains, carrying with it the scent of snow and fire, mingled into something raw and ancient. The sky above was bruised and heavy, its clouds veined with pale lightning. Beneath that strange, flickering light, Arya Stark and her small host made ready. They had chosen their ground carefully, a narrow plateau overlooking the chasm where the earth's fire burned below. The ground here was bare rock, streaked with ash and lined with fissures that vented faint red glow. It was the only place left in the world where flame still defied winter's dominion. Jareth Rivers stood near the edge, his cloak snapping in the wind. The shard of the Night King's champion hung from a chain around his neck, bound in cloth and leather. But even so, its cold seeped through to his skin. Each pulse from it was stronger now, faster. "He's coming," Jareth said. His voice was low, half carried away by the gale. Arya joined him, her hand resting on Needle's hilt. She wore no helm, only the hood of her black cloak, which whipped about her like the wings of a crow. "Then the gods bear witness," she said. "Let this night be his last." Below, the men were lighting their traps. They had broken open the fissures in the rock, channeling the molten flow beneath into crude trenches filled with oil and pitch. One spark, and the whole plateau would become a sea of fire. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had left. Sir Harren Longwater came up beside them, his face grim. "If the stories of the Night King are true, fire alone won't stop him." "No," said Arya, "but it might draw him close enough to finish what we began." Jareth's hand went to the wound beneath his armor. The skin there was pale and cold. the veins faintly blue. The shard had left its mark on him deeper than any blade. "If he comes," he said softly, "he'll come for this." They waited. The hours passed like days. The wind never ceased, nor the low thunder that rolled from the north. The men grew silent, the torches flickering in their hands. Each time the wind shifted, the temperature dropped lower, until their breath turned to frost before their faces. And then the sound began, the faint clatter of ice against stone. At first, it was far away. Then it grew louder, the steady rhythm of countless footsteps moving as one. Out of the storm they came, the dead. They advanced in silence, their pale forms visible through the falling snow, eyes glinting with blue light. Behind them, the ground froze solid, the frost spreading outward like a tide. At their head rode the Night King, his armor gleaming white as moonlit glass. Beside him walked the figure of his reborn champion, restored from ash and frost alike. The cracks in its armor glowed faintly red, the fire within it caged but not gone. 7 hells, Heron whispered. He's reforged it. Arya drew her dagger, the twin of the one that had once slain the Night King, reforged from Valyrian steel and dragonglass both. Then we break it again. The dead surged forward. "Now!" Arya shouted. The archers loosed their fire arrows. Flames rained down, igniting the oil. The plateau erupted in a sheet of burning light. The roar drowned out the wind, the snow turning to steam. Heat and frost warred across the field, hissing, crackling, screaming. For a heartbeat, the living dared to hope. But then the Night King raised his hand. The fire bent backward, twisted by his will, and the flames turned blue. The heat died, replaced by a terrible cold. The men nearest the blaze fell instantly, their bodies crystallizing where they stood. Jareth staggered as the shard at his chest blazed with light. He tore at the chain, gasping. "He's calling it! He's calling me!" The world around him blurred. The air itself seemed to stretch and pull. He felt the cold reaching into his heart, dragging him toward the Night King's gaze. "Jareth!" Arya caught his arm, but frost was already spreading beneath her fingers. He looked at her, his eyes wide with pain. "End it. You have to end it, Arya. The fire in the mountain. It's the only way." Understanding flashed in her eyes. "If I strike the shard, it'll take him with it," Jareth said. "But you'll have to draw him close." The Night King dismounted, stepping onto the burning plateau. The flames parted before him, shrinking away like beasts before a predator. His army stopped at the edge of the fire, waiting. He raised one hand toward Jareth, and the shard pulsed in answer. Arya tightened her grip on her dagger. "Then come and take him." She darted forward, swift as a shadow, weaving between the fissures of molten rock. The Night King's gaze followed her, cold and unblinking. When she struck, it was like lightning. The dagger's blade met his armor with a clang that split the air. Frost leapt outward, freezing the ground beneath her feet. He caught her wrist in one hand, his grip iron. "You cannot kill what is beyond death," he whispered. His voice was the wind, empty and endless. "Perhaps not," Arya hissed, "but I can unmake what should never have lived." With her free hand, she seized the shard from Jareth's chest. The cold burned her palm to the bone, but she did not let go. She drove it down into the fissure of molten stone. For an instant, all was still. Then the world exploded. Fire and frost collided, sending a column of light roaring into the heavens. The ground split open, molten rock pouring upward like the breath of a dragon. The Night King screamed, a sound of pure, inhuman fury, as cracks spread through his body. The armor shattered, blue fire spilling out like blood. Arya was thrown backward, the force tearing her cloak away. She struck the ground hard, dazed, her dagger lost to the flames. Jareth fell beside her, his body limp, the shard gone. The Night King staggered toward the edge of the chasm, his form dissolving into mist. His champion reached for him, but both were consumed by the rising fire. For a moment, two shapes of frost and flame entwined in the light, and then they were gone. Silence followed. The snow ceased. The wind died. The clouds parted, revealing a sky of pale gray. Arya struggled to her knees. The fissure had closed, the molten glow fading to embers. Where the Night King had stood, there was nothing but scorched stone and ash. She crawled to Jareth's side. His skin was cold, his eyes closed. For a moment, she feared he was lost. Then his chest rose faintly, a single shallow breath. "It's done," she whispered. "It's over." But as she spoke, a faint light flickered across the ground, a tiny pulse of blue deep within the ash, faint but steady. The last remnant of the shard, buried but unbroken. Arya stared at it, her heart heavy. "Not yet," she murmured. "Not while his shadow still lingers." Far below, deep in the veins of the earth, the fire still burned. But now, somewhere within its depths, frost began to form, and the wind whispered once more, soft as the sigh of a dying king. The dawn that broke over the vale was pale and thin, the light of a sun long weary of rising over so much death. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence too deep to trust. The wind that once howled through the mountains had stilled, and the snow that blanketed the land gleamed like a shroud of silver over the bones of the world. Arya Stark stood at the edge of the chasm, staring down into the depths where fire and frost had met. The wound in the earth still smoked faintly, exhaling curls of steam that smelled of ash and stone. Her cloak fluttered weakly in the morning breeze. The silence pressed upon her like the weight of 1,000 ghosts. Behind her, the survivors moved quietly among the ruins of their camp. Many had fallen when the mountain broke, swallowed by flame or crushed by stone. Sir Harren was gone, his sword found half buried in cooled ash. Of the 24 who had ridden with them, fewer than 10 still drew breath. Jareth Rivers lay upon a cloak near the edge, his face pale but peaceful. The maester they had brought from Winterfell knelt beside him, changing the bandages upon his shoulder. The flesh there had blackened where the shard had burned its mark, but no frost clung to it now. When Arya turned to him, the maester shook his head. "He lives, my lady, though only barely. The wound runs deeper than any I have seen. It is as if the cold still lingers within his heart. He deserves peace," she said softly. "But peace never seems to find men like him." The maester bowed his head and went to fetch water. Arya knelt beside Jareth, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. His eyes flickered beneath their lids, caught in dreams she could not see. She reached out, brushing a strand of frost-stiffened hair from his brow. "You did it," she whispered. "You ended him." But even as she spoke the words, doubt gnawed at her. She looked back toward the chasm. The glow had faded, yes, but not entirely. Deep below, where the fire still smoldered, a faint glimmer of blue stirred in the darkness. Small, weak, but alive. Arya's hand tightened on the hilt of her dagger. "No," she said under her breath. "Not again." The men who remained gathered wood and kindling, building pyres for the fallen. The smell of burning reached her, mingling with the scent of the mountain's breath. Smoke rose in dark columns against the pale sky, carrying the last of their dead toward whatever heavens remained open. When Jareth stirred, she was still sitting beside him. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then finding hers. "You're alive," he murmured. His voice was weak, the sound of a man far from the world of the living. "So are you," she said. He tried to smile, though the effort brought pain. "Did it end?" "For a time." She hesitated, glancing toward the fissure. "The Night King is gone. The dead have scattered. The world breathes again. But you don't believe it," he said softly. Arya shook her head. "There's always something left. A shadow, a whisper. Evil doesn't die. It sleeps." Jareth's gaze drifted to the horizon. The morning light touched the mountains, painting them gold for the first time in memory. "Then we'll let it sleep," he said. "Let it fade until the world forgets it ever was." "Men forget too easily," she replied. "That's why the dead keep finding their way back." He closed his eyes, his breath shallow but steady. "Then remember for them." She sat beside him until the sun rose fully, its pale warmth falling upon their faces. For the first time in years, she felt its touch without pain. By noon, the pyres were lit. The flames rose high, crackling fiercely against the cold. Arya stood among the survivors, her face unreadable as the fire consumed what was left of their company. The wind shifted, carrying the smoke eastward over the mountains. When the last embers died, they began their journey home. They left the chasm behind, though none dared to look back. The road through the mountains was narrow, the cliffs sharp as teeth on either side. The silence felt heavier the farther they went, as though the world itself waited for something. By the third night, they reached the edge of the vale. Beyond it, the lowlands stretched south toward the riverlands, where the snow thinned and the air grew soft. For the first time, Arya smelled earth instead of frost. They camped beneath a stand of bare trees. The fire they built was small but steady, its warmth welcome after the bitter winds. Jareth sat close to it, wrapped in furs, his color slowly returning. Arya joined him, sitting across the flames. "When we reach Winterfell," she said, "what will you do?" He stared into the fire for a long time before answering. "I swore my life to the Watch. There's no Watch now, no wall. Perhaps that's enough to call my oath done, but I've no home left to return to. Maybe I'll stay in the north, rebuild what can be rebuilt." She nodded. "Winterfell will need men like you. The north is scarred, but it will heal." He smiled faintly. "And you, my lady, will you rest at last?" Arya looked beyond the firelight, where the stars glimmered through the thinning clouds. "Rest doesn't suit me. There are still shadows in the world, even without the Night King. Someone has to keep watch when others sleep." He studied her for a moment. Jon would be proud. Her gaze flickered, but she did not answer. The firelight danced in her gray eyes, bright and sharp. Later, when the others slept, Arya walked alone to the edge of the camp. The moon hung low, silver and cold, its reflection caught in a thin crust of ice upon the river. She drew her dagger, the same that had struck the shard from Jareth's heart. The blade gleamed faintly, as if remembering what it had done. She turned it over in her hands. For a moment, she thought she saw frost form along its edge, a faint shimmer of blue. But when she blinked, it was gone. "Sleep," she whispered to the night. "Sleep and never wake again." The wind answered her, soft and low, stirring the ashes of the dying fire. At dawn, they rode west. The road wound through the valley like a scar across the snow, leading toward Winterfell. Behind them, the mountains loomed vast and dark, their peaks lost in cloud. No one looked back. Far below, deep within the mountain's heart, the ashes shifted. A single ember still glowed, pale and blue, hidden beneath the blackened stone. It pulsed once, then again, faint but steady, the heartbeat of something that refused to die. The fire that had devoured the Night King's champion flickered once more, now colder than before. The frost crept outward, slow and patient, as the light of day faded above. And though the world would know peace for a time, though spring would one day return, and the snows would melt, and the songs of the living would drown the silence of the dead, the heart of winter waited. It had learned the shape of fire. It would learn to wear it again. Thus ended the tale of the Night King's unique armor, born of dragon fire and frozen soul, broken by courage, yet never truly destroyed. In every age that followed, when the nights grew long and the air bit with a familiar chill, the North remembered, and the old ones whispered to the children by their hearths, "Beware the silence after the storm, for that is when the cold begins to dream."